Have scientists pushed past the point of no return? Are genetic mutants living among us? The answer may be far scarier than you think.
Genetics, what can it mean? The ability to perfect the physical and mental characteristics of every unborn child.
Of genetic engineering.
To choose the gene.
How can there not be any other independent studies that matter?
We're the guinea pig.
You have specified hazel eyes, dark hair, and fair skin.
Designer children, engineered to perfection.
Would you drink human breast milk that came from a cow?
Human cells have successfully grown inside a pig embryo.
Glow-in-the-dark cats.
De-extinction. And it's not science fiction at all.
And scientists announced today they have made a major breakthrough in the quest to create life in a laboratory for the first time.
For the first time, scientists have created artificial DNA, the universal genetic code.
They have produced a living cell in which the active DNA was put together by computers. What does this mean for science, and does it mean there is now synthetic life?
Scientists at the Scripps Research Institute in San Diego, California, created an organism not found in nature. They did it by adding artificial genetic building blocks. DNA is the genetic material the body uses to store the unique blueprint for each human being. The information exists as a code based on 4 chemicals, nicknamed A, T, C, and G. They pair up with each other in different combinations to create 20 amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. The Scripps team created 2 artificial chemicals called X and Y. They inserted them inside the cells of simple bacteria. That created the potential for 172 amino acids and proteins that do not currently exist. Those proteins could be used to create a new generation of drugs and vaccines. Adriana Heggie is the director of the Genome Technology Center at NYU Langone Medical Center.
What I think is fantastic about this technology is that we basically were able to cheat evolution and to trick this organism into accepting molecules that do not exist in nature.
World-renowned geneticist Craig Venter has been trying to unlock the mystery of life for 15 years. What have you achieved?
Well, we announced today the first synthetic cell. Instead of having a genetic relative that it evolved from, the parent of this cell is a computer.
What Venter has done is astonishing. With just 4 bottles of chemicals off the shelf in his lab, his team replicated more than 1 million bits of genetic code to create a living organism. Here's how it worked. They isolated bacterial cells and removed all of their genetic material, the DNA from inside. Then they took those 4 bottles of chemicals and used them to create new genetic material. They transplanted it into the empty cell. That material, that new cell booted up and began to reproduce, and reproduce 1 billion times.
I think this is the creation of life, and I think it's an experiment that shows that life is not a mystery, that it's not some mysterious force that infuses things that makes them come alive. If you put the right genetic message in the right order, put it into the right environment, it will come alive.
But along with promise comes precaution.
Like any great scientific innovation, this has enormous promise and enormous peril. This may allow us to make more virulent viruses. This could unleash a bacterium on the world that has properties we didn't expect that could cause great disease or ecological damage.
Scientists will surely debate whether this is truly creating new life, but no one can deny the potential impact of this achievement.
Venter says that within a year, this technology will be producing vaccines, and in the future, bacteria may be used as powerhouses to generate energy and clean up oil spills.
The Salk Institute recently created a human-pig hybrid. Why? The research project studies the possibility of human organs grown inside a pig fetus for transplantation.
Yes, you heard that right. Human cells have successfully grown inside a pig embryo. This is one step closer to the possibility of growing livers and other human organs inside of animals.
Scientists have potentially discovered a way to stop genetic diseases from being spread to future generations. They did so by altering the DNA in gremlin cells, like sperm, embryos, and eggs. They plan to only use this new method to correct disabilities or diseases, and not to improve or enhance a human's ability or state of health. This finding is revolutionary for the future of healthcare around the world.
In labs across the country, they're working with a new tool that can precisely edit genes inside living cells. It's a genome editing tool called CRISPR-Cas9, and it's being described as a game changer.
I like to call it a molecular scalpel for cells. It allows scientists to make a very precise change in the DNA of a cell or organism that could do something like correct a mutation that would otherwise cause disease.
Jennifer Doudna, a molecular biologist at UC Berkeley, was one of the scientists who developed it.
It's a technology that just allows a level of precision that we haven't had in the past.
Now it's being used in laboratories across the country in plant and animal research. Scientists have their eye on using it for everything from coming up with cures for blood disorders like sickle cell disease to combating antibiotic-resistant superbugs. At this laboratory outside Washington, scientists are using it on zebrafish to knock out genes that cause deafness.
The technology is moving very fast. It's almost every scientist is interested in the concept of genome engineering has shifted to using these techniques because they work so well.
Harvard University scientists are even using the tool on mosquitoes with dreams of eliminating malaria. But the rapid embrace of the technology also has scientists concerned.
Just because we can build a CRISPR gene drive to spread a trait through the wild population does not mean that we should.
A top concern, editing so-called germline cells, meaning human sperm, eggs, and embryos, where DNA changes could then be passed down from one generation to the next.
Inside a converted shoe factory in Shenzhen, China, scientists have launched an ambitious search for the genes linked to human intelligence.
It must be over 60% of your IQ is decided by your parents.
60%?
Yeah, so we want to prove it.
The man in charge of the project is 21-year-old science savant Zhao Bowen.
We're looking for the smart people. Those that has an IQ higher than 145 points.
Zhao works for the Chinese biotech giant BGI, which owns more gene sequencing machines than anyone in the world.
It's just continuously generating tons of data.
Tons of data taken from the genetic makeup of more than 2,000 of the brightest people BGI could find, most of them scientists and math wizards.
And we want to see what's in common.
What part on their genomes are they the same?
Yeah, that's important.
One of the people selected and who volunteered his DNA is Boston software developer Jeffrey Kaufman.
This is something that, if executed well, could be very positive for our society and for the world.
But discovering the genetics of intelligence could also be controversial. It would then be possible to test a human embryo to learn if the baby is destined to be smart. In vitro laboratories already allow parents to use genetic tests to screen their embryos not just for disease, but to choose embryos based on gender and other physical traits. BGI believes that one day there might be a test for IQ.
So in the future, you're saying, yes, people may well select for intelligence.
The technology will be there.
If that day comes, Kaufman believes that children chosen for intelligence would have an advantage.
Given the choice, most parents are going to rather have a more intelligent baby than a less intelligent baby, sort of all other things considered, and that for the most part, that seems like it should be a good thing.
Yet the fear is that China could unleash a future of designer children, engineered to perfection, the stuff of science fiction.
You have specified hazel eyes, dark hair, and fair skin.
The 1997 film Gattaca envisioned the ethical dilemmas in a society that screened out human imperfection.
I have taken the liberty of eradicating any potentially prejudicial conditions, premature baldness, myopia, alcoholism, and addictive susceptibility, propensity for violence.
Just this week, the U.S. government gave a conditional thumbs up to embryonic gene editing research. By moving or improving components of human DNA, this new gene editing technology could enhance someone's physical and biological characteristics, as well as eradicate a lot of diseases. Until recently, lawmakers had banned any form of gene editing.
In addition to the DNA of the mother and the father, material from a third person is used in the process.
The vast majority of a cell's DNA is located in the nucleus, but a tiny fraction is outside the nucleus in structures called mitochondria. These mitochondrial genes are inherited only from the mother and in rare cases can be defective. These defects can cause problems such as blindness, muscle disorders, and neurological illness. One proposed technique would work this way. A woman's nucleus is removed from her egg, leaving behind her unhealthy mitochondria. Her nucleus, containing the majority of her genes, replaces the nucleus in the donor egg, leaving an egg with the mother's nucleus and the donor's healthy mitochondria.
A baby comes into this world unlike any other baby has before. For the first time, doctors in Ukraine used a new type of three-parent IVF technique so that a previously infertile couple could have a child. To clarify, this isn't the first child born with DNA of three parents, but she was the first to be conceived using a technique called pronuclear transfer. In this instance, doctors in Kiev combined the father's sperm with the mother's egg and then placed those genes into an egg that was donated by another woman. Then they implanted that egg in the mother's womb, and on January 5th, she gave birth naturally to a baby girl. The baby has her parents' genetic identity with a trace amount of DNA from the donor woman. But her conception is controversial. For one, the science of three-parent IVF is new and still highly experimental. It also raises a number of ethical concerns and fears over the possibility of a future with so-called designer babies.
You know I love you, don't you? You're a part of me. And I'm a part of you.
There are almost 7.5 billion people on Earth. They come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. 15,000 humans are born to proud parents every hour. But over the years, some have tried to find another way to create life: human cloning.
You're copies of people out here in the world.
What?
Clones.
Its possibility has proven controversial. 19 years ago, 19 European countries took it upon themselves to ban human cloning.
You can't just go around cloning people. That's crazy.
The practice is broadly seen as dangerous and unethical, and opponents say it could be prone to abuse, arguing it will lead to a generation of humans whose organs and tissues will be harvested.
The shroud of the dark side has fallen. Begun. The Clone War has.
With the cloning of Dolly in 1996, the idea of human cloning became a hot topic of debate. To date, no known human clone has ever been produced. But in 2008, researchers cloned 5 human embryos. This was seen as the first step towards using cloning techniques for biomedical research and therapy.
When I was a boy, I had a Time Life book called The Birds. In it was a section showing the few U.S. species we'd already lost to extinction: the great auk, the Carolina parakeet, the heath hen. The biggest picture, though, was reserved for the passenger pigeon. Once numbering 3 billion or more, this species flew in vast flocks, passing overhead for days at a time. Witnesses described seeing a feathered river in the sky. Our hungry, growing nation also saw them as delicious and inexhaustible, and hunted them to near extinction in about 50 years. In the book was a picture of the very last one, named Martha, stuffed and sitting on a perch in the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Next to her was a sign that said, "Extinct." From 3 billion passenger pigeons to none. I still can't believe it. Martha died 100 years ago on September 1st, 1914. Her demise proved to be a watershed event. People finally began to care about the fate of our nation's wildlife. Conservation groups sprang up, including those formed by hunters to protect habitat, allowing many species to flourish, including grassland birds and waterfowl. This pigeon story doesn't end there, though. In a scene somewhat out of Jurassic Park, scientists today are actually trying to resurrect this grand bird. Starting with DNA from preserved museum specimens, the passenger pigeon's genetic code will eventually be spliced into the living cells of a close cousin, the band-tailed pigeon, with the hope of creating something that looks, sounds, and perhaps even acts like the real thing. They're calling the process de-extinction, and it's not science fiction at all.
De-extinction is an effort to bring back species that are known to be extinct. Things like saber-toothed cats.
Ross McPhee is the curator of mammals at New York's American Museum of Natural History.
The screenplay for Jurassic Park 4, I'm sure, is already being written, because here we have science colliding in a way with our worst fears.
Scientists in Australia announced last week they've been able to recreate the embryo of a unique but now extinct frog. Scientists at Harvard are doing research that might allow them someday to bring back the passenger pigeon, a bird that populated the eastern U.S. in the early 1800s until it became extinct at the turn of the century.
Laboratories around the world are working to bring back other long-gone species as well, such as the Pyrenean ibex, the Tasmanian tiger, and the woolly mammoth.
The woolly mammoth has been extinct for about 4,000 years, but is now on the verge of being resurrected in a modified version. Harvard professor George Church claims his team within the next 2 years will be able to create a hybrid embryo with an elephant and mammoth DNA. The scientists are likely to be many years away from producing a living so-called mammothant, but a successful attempt of creating an embryo could just be around the corner. Church says this elephant-mammoth hybrid would not just have the mammoth's distinctive long shaggy hair, but also smaller ears and blood better suited for cold weather. Church believes these qualities could actually help save the endangered Asian elephant, but others worry it's unethical. The scientists hope to actually grow the embryo in an artificial womb, hoping to avoid risking the life of female elephant that is already endangered.
Would you drink human breast milk that came from a cow? In suburban Beijing, scientists have created a growing herd of over 300 cloned and genetically modified cows that can produce milk containing the same health properties as human breast milk. Dr. Li Ning, professor at China's Agricultural University, said that the genetically modified cow milk is 80% the same as human breast milk. Ning explains that the modified milk contains many of the same antibodies and proteins that are good for our health, can improve our immune systems, and can help us fight viruses and bacteria.
It looks like a horse, sounds like a horse, and walks like a horse.
Well, I've been around this since they started here, and they're amazing.
So much so that a retired professional rodeo cowboy will even vouch for them.
They're not creating monsters. I mean, these horses are as real and as natural as anything you've ever seen and healthy.
Clint Johnson owns a few Broncos that buck just like the famous horse he used to ride. Like these foals, they are clones, genetic copies made in a lab.
Hundreds of years ago, man decided to breed animals for an intended purpose, whether that was for recreation, for companionship, or for food. Cloning is just another step in that process.
Blake Russell is the CEO of Viagen. His Austin, Texas-based company clones livestock, including cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses.
Cloning is an amazing technology to turbocharge those breeding programs, but is it any more playing God than any of the other technologies?
The company collects tissue samples, preferably from a living animal, and with the DNA from those cells, the lab produces embryo copies through a process called somatic cell transfer.
We named her Chloe, and she's 3 years old, and this is one of the reasons why we clone. We take an animal that wasn't fertile, and obviously she couldn't produce any genetics. She'd been to the national finals 19 times in a row since she was 3 years old, and here we have her back, and we can breed her to whatever we want.
In this case, competitive horses. Viagen's biggest share of customers are people that want to reproduce their polo, rodeo, or competition riding horses. The company claims its success rate in getting cloned embryos to newborn animals has climbed, but admits the process isn't perfect. Cloning competitive horses is a touchy subject. Only this year, the governing body over equestrian events okayed the use of clones in competitions like the Olympics.
South Korean scientists have created a glow-in-the-dark dog. Need I say more? Yeah, probably. So here's the story. The research team at Seoul National University made a beagle using somatic cell nuclear transfer technology. In other words, they cloned it. Tegan, as they named the fluorescent Fido, was genetically engineered to glow when placed under ultraviolet light.
People think that cloned cats are creepy, but what about a cloned cat that also glows in the dark?
It's an incredible story. Not everybody's happy to hear this, though, that scientists in South Korea cloned a pair of kitties who light up with a fluorescent glow when exposed to ultraviolet light. Glow kitties.
All right, now the question is, what was all this for? Apparently there's a good reason for it. Christy Lustout has the story.
At first glance, these cats look like any normal cat, but there are two big things which make them very different. One, the cats are clones. Two, they glow in the dark. You heard right. When they're put underneath ultraviolet light, they glow a dull red. And it's no accident. Scientists manipulated the donor cat's genetic code, then passed those changes onto the clones.
It's meaningful as we introduce outside genes to transgenic cloned cats for the first time, and as they have the red fluorescent protein gene in their organs, they give off a red color.
Here's how they did it. Scientists took skin cells from a Turkish Angora female cat and used a virus to insert the genetic instructions for making red fluorescent protein. Then they put the gene-altered nuclei into eggs for cloning. After that, they implanted the eggs back into the donor cat, which effectively became the surrogate mother. Now, these glow-in-the-dark cats shine a light on what may be possible down the road.
A company has tinkered with the genetic material of salmon so the fish can grow faster and reach groceries sooner. Are eaters ready? Here's Lisa Stark.
It looks like any other salmon, but opponents call it Frankenfish and hope to keep it off your dinner plate. Here's the difference. Both these fish are 18 months old, but the larger genetically engineered Aqua Advantage salmon grows twice as fast as the regular salmon.
This is the first genetically engineered animal that would be introduced to the food supply. So it's a big deal.
Atlantic salmon grows in fits and starts, but scientists found that adding genetic material from a Pacific salmon and an eel-like fish helps them grow round the clock.
This fish is indistinguishable from the traditional foods.
How can you say it's indistinguishable, though, when it clearly has a different genetic makeup than an Atlantic salmon?
But it tastes the same, it looks the same, and the biology is exactly the same.
FDA scientists today agreed.
Aqua Advantage salmon is Atlantic salmon, and food from Aqua Advantage salmon is as safe as food from other Atlantic salmon.
Still, critics claim more studies are needed on how the fish might affect humans and the environment. For instance, what happens if these altered fish somehow make it out into the wild? Would they breed with native salmon? Would they crowd out the wild fish? The company insists there are safeguards.
They're all sterile and they're raised in physically contained facilities.
But opponents say there's no guarantee all the fish will be sterile. And there's already one case study in how the best laid plans can go awry. Canola plants used to make canola oil were genetically engineered to be resistant to weed killer. The problem, their seeds have now migrated from the company farms, carried by the wind, and perhaps by trucks taking them to market. They're now growing on the roadsides of North Dakota. Scientists worry they may create a hard-to-kill superweed. As for the genetically altered salmon, one question still on the table: will folks eat it? And will they even know what they're eating? Because the FDA has to decide if the fish will even carry a special label.
World Health Organization declaring a global health emergency.
They now expect the virus transmitted by mosquitoes, of course, could reach farther north to 30 states now.
Bringing it the latest now in the battle against Zika.
The CDC says the virus has been linked to birth defects.
Scientists hoping to use a new weapon, genetically modified mosquitoes.
They're hot about this here. They're dead set against using this neighborhood in an experiment.
They're trying to jam this down our throat without our consent.
And they're warning that your neighborhood could be next.
Genetically modified mosquitoes to target insects insects that could spread the virus. But that plant is raising concerns in the neighborhood where they may be tested. And ABC's Steve Osunsami is on the scene in Key West, Florida. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning to you, George. They're hot about this here. The families understand the effort to fight Zika and other mosquito-borne diseases, but they're dead set against using this neighborhood and their children in an experiment with genetically modified bugs.
There is news tonight about the quest for the perfect apple, one that doesn't brown when you slice it. Sounds too good to be true? Well, it's not, and it's coming to a grocery store near you. Here's ABC's Gloria Riviera.
Watch this, a time-lapse video of two seemingly identical apples. With time, the apple on the left browning as normal after cut, bruised, or bitten. The apple on the right still perfect. The difference, science. The apples are a brainchild of a small Canadian company, Okanagan Specialty Fruits. They say their Arctic apples, a version of the Granny Smith and Golden Delicious, have a suppressed enzyme that delays browning. It will still rot eventually, but stay cosmetically superior for longer. This week, the U.S. Department of Agriculture approved the Arctic apples, a genetically modified non-browning apple, deciding that they are not likely to have a significant impact on the human environment. We asked customers, how do you like them apples?
If I knew up front, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. In fact, I'm a bit intrigued to try it.
I don't mind that they turn brown. I mean, you can do the same thing with lemon juice to keep them from browning.
Critics are concerned about misleading customers who may accidentally bite into an apple that is much older than it appears. Already, 80% of the corn and soybeans Americans consume are genetically altered. But as for these Arctic apples, the earliest you would see them in your grocery store would be 2017.
Now, almost 90% of corn and more than 90% of soybeans that are planted in the United States are genetically engineered.
So it's just in everything.
This has been The Confidential Report. For even more stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel today. And please show your support by clicking the like button on this video. For even more stories and news you deserve to know the truth about, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching The Confidential Report.